The General Grand Council of Cryptic Masons International welcomes you to the following presentation.
So this evening we have with us Rite Puissant companion John Bridegroom, who is a past most illustrious Grandmaster Cryptic Masons in Indiana. He also served as the General Grand Sentinel for the General Grand Council of Cryptic Masons International. And so with that, we're going to let him go ahead and get started, and he will lead off with the topic of his educational and lecture is tonight, and we'll enjoy it. Thank you, brethren. Good to see you again.
All right. Well, thank you, Jason. I appreciate that. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here, if I can figure that out. Let's see.
It's the green button on the bottom that says share screen. I have given you access for it, brother.
Got it. All right. Does that look like everybody can see what's going on there?
You are doing it, sir.
Wonderful. All right. So again, thank you, most illustrious Grandmaster Reed, for asking me to come on and do this. It's a pleasure to put these thoughts together and share them with you guys. Hopefully you'll find them informative, and maybe they'll even bring something to light that you haven't thought of before regarding Cryptic Masonry and the Cryptic degrees. So the topic, as you can see here, is Cryptic Masonry, and what I kind of coined as the philosophical rite and the keys to the past and the future of Freemasonry. The degrees of Royal Master, Select Master, and Super Excellent Master belong to, in the American system, the Council of Cryptic Masons. The first two of these relate directly to the Hiramic legend and the craft degrees of Freemasonry, and as such, we're more concerned with the Royal and Select Master degrees in this particular discussion. They are, of course, called cryptic degrees because they revolve around the secret vault, or crypt. And before we jump into the various aspects, I want to take a moment and make a particular point. I believe that the purpose of teaching an allegory, which Freemasonry certainly does, is to allow the individual to interpret the story and symbols based off of his perspective and to apply them to his life. This philosophical approach is how these teachings remain relevant through the ages. And in other words, we often look at things in a linear or Western perspective. We look for answers to puzzles and expect the revelations to come in such a simple form. But instead, in the allegorical model, the individual is the variable that changes the answer each time. So it's important that we remember our significant role in the equation and work to advance the philosophy rather than just figure out old answers. In this manner, I've tried to look hard at both the facts of the cryptic rite, but also try to interpret them in the context of Freemasonry and of my own spiritual growth. So when I first became involved with the Grand Council of Indiana, I started diving in deeper into the cryptic degrees to try to better understand them, somewhat out of a necessity to just do my job better. And instead, I fell in love with what these degrees deliver to the initiate when they're contemplated. I was then spurred on by realizing that there were some who feel the cryptic degrees are insignificant in the system of Freemasonry. Some have gone as far as to suggest that they should either go away or be relegated to lesser degrees in another body. And it has always shocked me when that opinion is expressed, that these kind of changes are somehow the way of the future for the craft. It's absurd to make such a statement, and it shows a complete lack of understanding of the cryptic degrees and their import. We all likely agree that the most important part of the system of Freemasonry are the three craft degrees. Some suggest that perhaps everything one needs to know is included in those degrees regarding the craft. This fits in neatly with those opinions that critique the American or York Rite system. After all, there is no higher degree than a Master Mason. How then can important knowledge be contained in a system that is beyond that? And indeed, when we look at Freemasonry across the globe, you notice that the linear structure of the craft found in the United States is less apparent abroad. Some of the degrees found in the American system are organizations unto themselves overseas. But I would argue that either by design or by happy accident, that the American Rite creates within its linear structure a beautiful through line of the teachings that complement and reinforce each other and create a lifelong path for the initiate wishing to discover the depths of his own being. The cryptic degrees may well be some of the shortest degrees practiced in Freemasonry today. It's not uncommon to see them both performed in a single night. As the saying goes, though, good things come in small packages. The cryptic degrees contain some of the most important concepts in the Masonic system, and I feel that they are the most important connection to the craft degrees. While the Holy Royal Arch degree holds the distinction of being the pinnacle of Freemasonry and was practiced as such originally, I believe the cryptic degrees have a much more important connection to our meaning as well as to our history. I'm not alone in having felt that these degrees were indeed very special. Henry Wilson Coyle, 33rd degree, in his encyclopedia states that the cryptic rite is one of the smallest, but one of the most important and certainly one of the most curious of all the rites. Mr. Webb describes the Select Master degree as the summit and perfection of ancient Masonry, and without which the history of the Royal Arch cannot be complete. Brother Mackey states in his History of Freemasonry that for many years there have been 3 distinct claims urged for jurisdiction over these degrees in America. First, by the Supreme Council of the 33rd degree. Next, by some of the grand chapters. And lastly, by the grand councils, which are composed of the subordinate councils of each state. It would appear that the cryptic degrees and the cryptic rite were held in high esteem by eminent brothers within the craft. On the surface, these degrees teach us of the preservation of the word. In a system where the craft degrees teach us of the loss of the word, and the capitular degrees teach us of the recovery of the word, the cryptic degrees teach us how it was preserved, making the connection between the two. So in a very basic way, this completes the story, or fills in the gaps of the allegorical story of Solomon's temple. This alone makes them very important to the seeker of Masonic light. It may seem curious or accidental that the cryptic degrees come after the Royal Arch degree. I make the case that this is very much intentional. In an attempt to sum up the exoteric teachings contained in the system and its arrangement, consider this. In the craft degrees, you learn that the word is lost and that future generations should discover it. However, you don't know what it is. In the Royal Arch degree, you discover the lost word, and by doing so, you realize what its true nature is. It is significant that the word was discovered in the era of the Second Temple and in the rubble of the first. In the cryptic degrees, you discover how and where the word was preserved. When looking only at the ritual and its timeline, this appears to be insignificant. Why do you need to know how and where it was preserved if you've already found it? But esoterically, that arrangement makes perfect sense, and I'll touch on that a little bit more in a moment. But back to the cryptic degrees themselves. Only in the cryptic degrees does the initiate meet and speak with Hiram Abiff, whom he is intimately familiar with by then. All of this places the cryptic degrees in a very special position, but there's more here than meets the eye. To fully understand how significant the cryptic degrees are, we must look at what is really being taught to the candidate. But we must remember that Freemasonry self-describes as a system of morality, veiled in allegory, and illustrated by symbols. So as we continue, I will caution us not to get lost in the allegory alone, as we often do, but to remember to look deeper. The Royal Master degree comes first, and 2 important things happen in its very brief ceremony. The first is a very pointed contemplation of death and how its inevitability looms over us as an inspiration to build industriously. This theme, the memento mori, is one of the most powerful underlying facets of all of Freemasonry. Further, in this allegorical contemplation of building and death, of creation and destruction, we are told that the secret we seek will be buried and preserved. And with a significant gesture, it tells us where. The second is a detailed description of the Sanctum Sanctorum and its furniture. Doing our best not to get lost in the allegory and remembering that we are building a temple of man as a fitting place for God to dwell within, these lessons become more poignant and are preparatory for the successive degree of Select Master. In the temple of man, what does the Sanctum Sanctorum represent, and what is preserved there should death overtake us? The Select Master degree is a bit more complex, and its value, in my opinion, cannot be overstated. It is here, when joined with the teachings of the Royal Master degree, that we find the key to all of the Masonic teachings. The story of preservation taught in the Select Master degree is really a retelling of the Masonic legend of Enoch. Enoch was the seventh patriarch in the Bible, and one of only two people who did not die, but ascended directly to heaven. Enoch was the great-grandfather of Noah, and Mackey relates the legend of Enoch as follows. Enoch, being inspired by the Most High, and in obedience to a vision, constructed underground in the bosom of Mount Moriah an edifice consisting of 9 brick vaults situated perpendicularly beneath each other and communicating by apertures left in the arch of each vault. He then caused a triangular plate of gold to be made, each side of which is a cubit long. He enriched it with the most precious stones and engraved upon it the ineffable name of God. He then encrusted the plate upon a stone of agate of the same form, and he placed it upon a cubical stone of marble and deposited the whole within the 9th or innermost arch. When this subterranean building was completed, Enoch made a slab or door of stone, and attaching a ring of iron to it, by which it might, if necessary, be raised, he placed it over the aperture of the uppermost arch, and so covered it over with soil that the opening could not easily be discovered. Enoch himself was not permitted to enter it more than once a year, and on his death or ascension, all knowledge of this building and of the sacred treasures which it contained was lost until, in succeeding ages, it was accidentally discovered while Solomon was engaged in building a temple above the spot on the same mountain. The legend proceeds to inform us that after Enoch had finished the construction of the 9 vaults, fearing that the principles of the arts and sciences which he had assiduously cultivated would be lost in that universal deluge of which he had received a prophetic vision, he erected above ground 2 pillars, one of marble to withstand the destructive influences of fire, and one of brass to resist the action of water. On the pillar of brass, he engraved the history of creation, the principles of the arts and sciences, and the doctrines of speculative masonry as they were practiced in that day. And on the pillar of marble, he inscribed in hieroglyphic characters the information that near the spot where they stood, a precious treasure was deposited in a subterranean vault. These are no doubt the pillars of the porch, which in our ritual are described as being made to withstand conflagration and inundation, fire and flood. Anyone familiar with the cryptic degrees will immediately recognize the common elements. There is no doubt that the inspiration for the drama that unfolds within the cryptic degrees is indeed the legend of Enoch. And this may not seem to be an important fact when looking at organized Freemasonry today, but the connection lies buried in our past, before the formation of the Grand Lodge of England in 1717 and Anderson's constitutions in 1725. Anderson's constitutions were commissioned to be a definitive work designed to henceforth govern the craft. Prior to that point, the craft was governed by documents we now call the ancient constitutions or charges. Within the ancient charges, this statement is essentially unchanged. The great Hermarines, that was Cubus' son, the which was Cubus was Sem's son, that was Noah's son. This same Hermarines was afterward called Hermes, the father of wisdom. He found one of the 2 pillars of stone and found the science written therein, and he taught it to other men. Hermes, the father of wisdom, who is indeed a man called Hermes Trismegistus, is cited as the founder of Freemasonry in these documents. What's more is that here we have Hermes Trismegistus, the great-grandson of Noah, who is the great-grandson of Enoch, discovering the pillars of the porch. Notice that one of the pillars is said to have contained the liberal arts and sciences of the world. And in our Freemasonry, we state that the pillars contained the secrets of Masonry. And I'll repeat that in our ritual, we state that the pillars were built to withstand inundation and conflagration, fire and flood. So Enoch designs 2 pillars intended to survive fire and flood. His great-grandson Noah is the only surviving family of the great flood. Noah's great-grandson Hermes discovers the pillars and returns the knowledge to man. Hence, Hermes is the founder of Freemasonry in the post-Diluvian world, as the ancient charges state. A chosen family bloodline, preserving the word for future generations. It is in this way that the cryptic degrees tie themselves to the craft degrees more strongly than any other system, not on the surface with our current system, but to our ancient charges and heritage prior to 1717. If you needed any other clues to this intentional connection to the legend of Enoch, consider these points. Hermes is known as the father of wisdom, and Solomon is known to have received all wisdom from God, making their interchangeability fitting in this storyline. Hermes' title of Trismegistus means thrice great, and in the cryptic degrees, Solomon is sometimes referred to as thrice illustrious King Solomon. And when you serve as illustrious master of a council of cryptic masons, you are eligible for the degree of thrice illustrious master. Even Anderson's constitutions did not fully abandon the concept, and in his constitutions, he briefly states the legend of Enoch, and when he published the 2nd edition of the constitutions, he repeated the legend with the additional statement that Enoch was expert and bright in both the science and the art of geometry and masonry, an abridgment of which he placed on pillars which he had erected. This gives us a strong case for the important place the cryptic degrees hold, but there's more to the equation than just ritual relevance and allegorical timeline. I want to dive just a little deeper, though, and touch on what I believe is the most valuable aspect of the cryptic degrees. Why retell the legend of Enoch? Why preserve it in a system like Freemasonry in a veiled manner? It is in this question that the jewel of the cryptic rite lies, I believe. It is why I refer to the cryptic rite as the philosophical rite of Freemasonry. When looking at the degrees and doing our best to lift the veil of allegory to see the message underlying, again, we must remember that we are building a temple of man. In craft masonry, we are almost always set in the Solomonic temple. The Jewish nature of our ritual is overt, and here it helps us to understand a great lesson. In Jewish mysticism, we find the art of the Kabbalah, and in the Kabbalah, the diagram of the tree of life. This diagram shows the 10 Sephirah, which are explained as emanations of the divine or states of being, and the paths between them illustrate the path to become one with the divine. Or perhaps in Masonic terms, making our temple of man a fitting place for God to dwell within. In this diagram, the bottom is man in Malkuth, or the mundane world. And at the apex is Kether, or the divine. And there are many parallels to this system in Freemasonry, but in relating to the cryptic degrees, let me show you an alternate way that the tree of life is sometimes depicted, using concentric circles. Here, man stands on the outside circle in Malkuth, and in the center circle is Kether, or the divine state. And if we draw a line across the middle, we discover a depiction of 9 arches. And this mechanism, hidden in the allegory of 9 arches, with the divine representation by the master's word on a triangular plate of gold in the 9th arch, is teaching us that Freemasonry is an inward path. And if we apply this to the notion of the temple of man, and the secret vault is below the sanctum sanctorum, which is the heart of man, then we learn that man must search within himself to discover the true nature of God. That we must know thyself, that deep hermetic axiom that is even carved upon the tiler's chair outside the lodge room in the house of the temple. So circling back to the arrangement of the York-Rite system, while the craft degrees teach us that the word was lost and that future generations must find out the right, we don't know what we are searching for. The chapter degrees teach us the divine nature of the word and when we recover it, and that it is the name of God himself. This signifies that what we have lost is our connection to the divine. However, if the Royal Arch takes place in the Second Temple era, it follows that it represents the afterlife, and the word was discovered in the rubble of the First Temple, after death. In the cryptic degrees, we are taught that we must search for it within ourselves, deep beneath our hearts where it was preserved. This is why the cryptic degrees are the philosophical degrees of Freemasonry. This key shows us that although we have lost our connection to the divine, we can search within ourselves to rediscover it. It is only here that we are truly taught to look within, that Freemasonry as a whole is an inward path, or as what was once said, the kingdom of God is within you. Much like the lost word that was hidden away in a secret vault, the cryptic degrees appear to hold in their rituals, seemingly unnoticed, a very tangible link to our past and the very key to our teachings. The degrees of preservation are in themselves preserving a rich and potent connection to the ancient craft that has otherwise eroded in the sands of time, and teach us how to utilize all of the teachings that we have received from the previous degrees. Though the connections are from legend to legend, there is a purpose of design evident in the preservation. It is the reason why the secret words of the select master mean man of my choosing, or select man. Because the student who knows what is lost and knows what it means and knows how to search for it is truly the chosen one. And that is why the virtues of silence and secrecy must mark our conduct as select masters. And that's all I have for you.